Absolutely. I mean, since there was an attack and since there was the fear of an attack, the whole security services are on edge, I mean, in Paris, you have this amazing deployment of, I think, like something like 50,000 police and soldiers, whatever. But, and which, by the way, they managed to secure yesterday's opening ceremony, which was a huge challenge. And you can feel the relief, the Home Affairs Minister was very relieved this morning because it succeeded. I mean, nothing happened.
As the sporting action begins in Paris, French security services are braced for the prospect of further attacks on the Olympics after those arson attacks on the country's high-speed rail network. Let's speak to Florence Biederman, who is a journalist in Paris. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what do we know about these arson attacks, which were very much described as a coordinated attack?
Absolutely. I mean, 4 attacks intervened at the same time around 4 in the morning French time against those high-speed lines in 4 different places, which means they were meant to block the whole traffic, like toward northeast, southwest, southwest. One of them was foiled in the southeast because they were making some night repairs, so they managed to see people flee, and it didn't happen. But in all the 3 others places, obviously, it happened, which means that the circulation was blocked for. And it prevented hundreds of thousands of French people who were starting their holiday time to go on their holiday. What is known so far, I mean, apart the fact that it was highly coordinated, massive attack, nothing. There are, of course, suspicions, there are rumors, but the investigators didn't give any solid hint on who that could be.
And that speculation, I mean, it varies from Russian proxy groups to Iranians to ultra left-wing militants within France. I mean, I even read something about it. Could it possibly be farmers? I mean, it really sounds like that they don't know.
Well, farmers, I mean, so far in French history, in French protest history, which is very rich, farmers didn't do that kind, of attack. I mean, they could demonstrate, there could be some violence, but nothing of the kind. There was in the past some attacks against the rail network that were attributed to the extreme left. But again, I mean, it's really too early to say. Of course, since France is one of the numerous Western countries supporting Ukraine, sending weapons, etc., one of the first, suspicion, of course, if you think of a foreign intervention, would be Russia. But again, I mean, as you said, it's speculation, and it's really early to point the finger right now.
We were speaking to one of our reporters who were in Paris for the opening ceremony last night, and he was saying it was such an incredible feat that the French security services had effectively locked down Paris, obviously a huge city, so successfully ahead of the Olympic ceremony, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I guess the challenges are, I mean, how do you protect an entire rail network? How do you protect? There's going to be other vulnerable points, aren't there, across the country throughout the course of the Olympics, which they're obviously going to be concerned. The reports in the Times today, there could be further attacks coming.
Absolutely. I mean, since there was an attack and since there was the fear of an attack, the whole security services are on edge, I mean, in Paris, you have this amazing deployment of, I think, like something like 50,000 police and soldiers, whatever. But, and which, by the way, they managed to secure yesterday's opening ceremony, which was a huge challenge. And you can feel the relief, the Home Affairs Minister was very relieved this morning because it succeeded. I mean, nothing happened. But there is this massive deployment along the Seine. You cannot have this deployment all around the country, obviously. And around the rail network, yes, they are also pretty careful. They try also to control. But no, you cannot control everything. You could control the space, the airspace. There were no planes over Paris yesterday during the opening ceremony. This you can do for a limited time. To control the whole country, obviously not. But let's say the strategical places, yes, they do the maximum they can. But obviously you cannot prevent everything.
Let's talk about the opening ceremony itself. I mean, so unfortunate with the weather. We were speaking to Scott Bryan earlier on, who was saying that he'd read that there was the equivalent of something like 15 days worth of rain just in 5 hours yesterday. I mean, you would not expect a rainy evening, would you, in late July in Paris? But overall, I mean, what was your assessment, and how has it gone down in France itself?
Well, I mean, my assessment, I think, is the assessment of millions of people. It was an amazing show, you know. I mean, it's difficult to resist to hours of such creativity, inventivity, you know, unexpected things. Like, I think the final, Celine Dion final was really very moving. You know, one of the presenters on French TV was crying. I think she was not the only one. I heard it was the same on an American channel. You know, it was really something like it's hard to resist and say, oh my God, there was this and that. It was really something fantastic. And that's what I read in the foreign press, but also in the French media and all around you, you know, on Twitter. Of course, there will be some people criticizing this or that. But something that is very striking is that after all the political turmoil in recent times, you know, the fact that the far right in France is becoming more and more powerful in French politics, you know, it didn't ruin the whole ceremony. There was, for example, a polemic on the fact that Aya Nakamura, this black French singer, would sing some Edith Piaf song. Then there was a polemic. The far right said it's a shame, or kind of a national anthem sung by this woman who has such crude words. But eventually she was there. She performed, and everybody was somehow happy with the whole of it.
Florence, thank you so much for speaking to us.
You're welcome.
That is Florence Biederman, who is a journalist in Paris. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because a few people have made this comment, and we've talked about it this morning. Opening ceremonies tend to be at the Olympics about celebrating your country, your culture. By that very nature, people in that country are probably going to really love it.
Yes.
Like we did London 2012.
Yes.
Whereas probably some people in London 2012 around the world went, what?
Yeah,
What's that about?
what's
I understand the
all about?
NHS, a bit confused by that. And I think there might be an element of that with the French, that actually French people say this was brilliant,
Yeah.
this is absolutely showcasing what we do well. And maybe other people around the world at times, not throughout all of it, at times scratching their head saying, don't quite get that.
Nothing wrong with a bit of patriotism. Richard has been in touch and says the Olympics opening had some brilliance marred by the weather, the lighting of the Eiffel Tower, the horse and the rider up the river, the Olympic flame in a balloon. Probably lasted maybe a little bit longer than necessary. I felt for the athletes. Richard says being made to stand in the rain. Looking forward to some brilliant competitions and personal bests, he says.
Victoria says the opening ceremony was pretty boring at times, so switched over. But later on, I agree with you, Chloe, after dark, completely different and rather wonderful. Because we were just talking about the difference there between, you know, Tom Daley and Helen Glover sort of waving on a kind of tourist boat going down a rainy Seine with a poncho on.
Yes.
In daylight,
Yes.
with, you know, a bit of graffiti behind and some beautiful buildings, obviously, in Paris, compared to then after dark,
Yes.
the lights, the lighting up of the Eiffel Tower, you know, the cauldron and the Olympic flame lifting up into the balloon. It kind of, you know...
Much more dramatic.
Dramatic. And as Scott Bryan pointed out earlier on as we spoke to him with his analysis of it all, you know, when you're in a stadium, it's contained and it's easier to feel that atmosphere. Whereas when it's over 4.5 miles or whatever it was on the River Seine, and it's not helped by the torrential rain, then it's more difficult to get that atmosphere. Apparently, when you were actually there on the side of the river, you could hear the sounds a bit better. It just at times felt a bit disjointed, didn't it? You'd see a few athletes on a boat and then you'd go over to something that was maybe a little bit random. But I go back to the fact that, you know, why didn't you put a cover over the pianist who was getting absolutely rained on? And the dancers on the catwalk, as was pointed out earlier on, you could have maybe put some kind of cover over the bridge so that they weren't dancing in pools of water with that complete sense of jeopardy that any moment they could injure themselves.
It's the breakdancers I feel sorry for with the very, very wet elements there.